She was a virgin, but there was something about her that pushed the boundaries of innocence. He was a man who had never loved because love always came with a price, and the words he whispered sounded like desire, but hid something else. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Dominic Sanchez carried on his shoulders the weight of 5 generations of secrets buried in the red soil of Virginia. At 39, he was the last heir to Westwood Estate, a property that stretched across thousands of acres among the Blue Ridge Mountains, where century-old coffee plantations whispered stories no one dared to tell anymore. The colonial mansion, with its faded blue wooden windows and porches that embraced the horizon, held more than memories. It harbored curses. Dominic didn't believe in love. He believed in possession, in control, especially over himself. He had learned early that the men of his lineage were condemned to lose everything they loved. His mother had died giving birth to his younger brother. Hannah had passed away before they could marry, and all the other women who dared to get close met tragic fates. For this reason, he kept himself isolated in that green immensity, managing business from a distance, receiving only the oldest employees, and avoiding any involvement that might awaken family ghosts. The house breathed history in every room. Walnut furniture darkened by time, baccarat crystals inherited from great-grandparents, oil portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow those who walked the corridors. In the library, noble wood shelves guarded manuscripts in archaic English, land grant documents, yellowed letters telling of shady business from the antebellum period. And there was the sealed wing, where no one had entered for 15 years, since his brother Ryan disappeared on a stormy night, leaving only bloodstains on the floor and a note. "Forgive me for what I discovered." Evelyn Stewart was 22 and carried in her heart the restlessness of someone who always knew she didn't completely belong anywhere. Raised by her grandmother in the mountains of Somerset, she had grown up hearing whispers about her origin, stories interrupted when she approached, meaningful glances exchanged by the elders. Her grandmother, Martha Grace, was respected as a healer and midwife, but had never revealed who Evelyn's parents were. She only said the girl had blood from 2 waters, and that one day she would discover her true place in the world. Evelyn guarded her virginity not out of fear, but from a strange certainty that her body was waiting for something specific, someone specific. She had recurring dreams since childhood. A man with dark eyes and tortured expression, a great house surrounded by plantations, rooms where the scent of jasmine mixed with the aroma of roasted coffee. She would wake with her heart racing, her hands searching the air for something she couldn't name. When the temporary archivist position at Westwood Estate was announced in town, Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine. She couldn't explain why, but she was certain she needed to go there. Martha tried to dissuade her, murmuring prayers and blessing her with sprigs of rue, but Evelyn had already decided. Deep down, she felt that her entire life had prepared her for this moment. The road leading to the estate wound between hills covered in green, where the sky stretched blue and infinite. When the wrought iron gates opened and Evelyn saw the mansion for the first time, her breath faltered. It was exactly as in her dreams. The same porch with white columns, the same sash windows, the same garden where jasmine intertwined with the railings. Her heart began to beat so strongly that she had to lean on the seat of the rural bus that had brought her there. Dominic received her in his office, a room lined with dark wood where antique maps shared space with modern computers. When their eyes met, the world seemed to sigh. He was tall, dark, with grey strands at his temples and a presence that occupied the entire space. His eyes were exactly as she had dreamed, black as roasted coffee, but with a sadness so deep it hurt. Evelyn felt she had known him forever, that his face had been sculpted into her soul before she was even born. Dominic, for his part, stood motionless before this woman. Evelyn had skin golden by the Virginia sun, chestnut hair that shone with honey highlights, and eyes green as the new leaves of the plantation. But it wasn't just her beauty that disturbed him. It was the strange sense of recognition, as if she were the answer to a question he had never known how to formulate. When she smiled timidly and extended her hand to greet him, Dominic felt an electric current run through his entire body. The Westwood Estate Library was a sanctuary forgotten. By time, walnut shelves rose to the ceiling, loaded with leather-bound volumes, yellowed manuscripts, and documents that seemed to guard secrets of centuries. When Evelyn entered that environment for the first time, she felt a familiar shiver run down her spine. The smell of old paper mixed with the aroma of waxed wood awakened memories she didn't know she possessed. Dominic accompanied her to a mahogany table where piles of documents awaited organization. His movements were controlled, almost feline, but Evelyn noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided looking at her directly for too long. When their hands brushed as he handed her an inventory, both felt the electricity that hovered between them like an unspoken promise. "The oldest documents are in these boxes," he said, his deep voice echoing in the silence. "Some date back to the 18th century. My family has always been careful with records." There was something in the way he pronounced those words that made Evelyn shudder. It wasn't just care, it was obsession, as if those papers guarded more than simple commercial transactions. The first days, Evelyn immersed herself in work with a dedication that surprised even herself. She catalogued inventories of freed slaves, land grant letters, marriage contracts revealing strategic alliances between powerful families. But it was the more intimate documents that disturbed her. Diaries of women from the Sanchez family, love, letters abruptly interrupted, death certificates of young wives who died in unexplained circumstances. Dominic passed by the library several times a day, always with a plausible excuse, checking a document, fetching a book, verifying her progress. But Evelyn felt the weight of his gaze when he thought she wasn't paying attention. It was a gaze that undressed and dressed her at the same time, that explored her as if she were a mystery to be deciphered. And she, who had always been shy with men, found herself anxiously awaiting his visits. One afternoon, while organizing a stack of intimate letters from the 19th century, Evelyn found something that made her stop breathing. Among the yellowed correspondence was an oval portrait framed in silver, a young woman with chestnut hair and green eyes who could be her twin sister. On the back, an inscription in cursive handwriting, "Elizabeth Stewart Sanchez, 1889-1890, beloved wife and mother. May God have her in his glory." Evelyn's hands trembled as she held the portrait. Stewart, her surname. This woman shared not only her features, but also her family name. She searched feverishly for more information and found certificates reporting Elizabeth's death a few months after giving birth, victim of mysterious fevers. Other women in the family had similar fates, premature deaths, always after becoming pregnant, always in circumstances that doctors of the time couldn't explain. When Dominic entered the library that afternoon, he found Evelyn pale as paper, holding the portrait with trembling hands. He stopped at the door, his face closing into a marble mask as he recognized what she held. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice carrying a tension she had never heard before. "Among the letters." "In the large chest," Evelyn replied, raising her eyes to him. "Dominic, this woman, she looks like me and she has the same surname as I do." The silence that followed was as dense as the mist that sometimes covered the plantations at dawn. Dominic approached slowly, as if she were a wild animal that might flee at any sudden movement. When he stopped beside her, so close she could feel the heat emanating from his body, he extended his hand and delicately touched her face. "Elizabeth was my great-great-grandmother," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "She died young, like all the women who loved men in this family." His fingers traced the line of Evelyn's jaw with a reverence that bordered on adoration. "And you are exactly like her." Evelyn felt the world spin around her. The connection she felt with this house, the dreams that had visited her since childhood, the strange familiarity of each corridor. It was beginning to make sense in a frightening way. "Do you think we're related?" she asked, her voice failing. Dominic didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned in even closer, bringing his face near hers until their breaths mingled. "I think you are much more than you appear," he murmured, his lips almost touching hers. "And that terrifies me." The moment was interrupted by a thud from upstairs, as if something heavy had fallen. Dominic moved away abruptly, the mask returning to his face. "It's just the wind," he said quickly, but Evelyn noticed the tremor in his voice. "The house is old. Sometimes it makes strange noises." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Lying in the small guest house where Dominic had accommodated her, she looked at the ceiling thinking about the portrait, the strange resemblance, the moment of near kiss in the library. Her body still vibrated with the memory of his touch, and she found herself imagining what it would have been like if he had completed the gesture, if their lips had finally met. But there was something more disturbing, the growing certainty that her arrival at this estate was no coincidence. It was as if her entire life had been a preparation for this moment, for this man, for a truth she wasn't yet ready to face. The following days brought a subtle dance between Evelyn and Dominic, made of glances that met and turned away, of conversations that began deeply and ended abruptly, of a magnetism that grew with each proximity. Evelyn dove deeper into the family archives, as if searching for answers to questions she didn't yet know how to properly formulate. It was while scouring documents from the late 19th century that she found records of a Stuart family who had been neighbors of the Sanchezes, owners of lands that bordered the estate. There were mentions of disputes over property boundaries, arranged marriages between the families, and something about a pact sealed in blood that would guarantee eternal prosperity to the Sanchezes in exchange for a price that wasn't clearly specified in the documents. One afternoon, when Dominic went out to supervise the harvest, Evelyn decided to explore the mansion in more detail. She climbed the wooden stairs that creaked under her feet, walked corridors lined with faded floral wallpaper, past dusty rooms where furniture covered by sheets looked like sleeping ghosts. There were portraits on all the walls, men with serious expressions and women of melancholic beauty, many dying young according to the dates engraved on the gilded frames. It was following the main corridor that Evelyn found the passage leading to the forbidden wing of the house. A heavy rope blocked the entrance, with a handwritten warning by Dominic: "Restricted area, compromised structure." But while looking at that barrier, Evelyn heard something that made her freeze, the muffled sound of someone walking on the floor, above slow and dragging steps, as if the person had difficulty moving. Dominic had said he lived alone on the estate, except for the employees who returned to their homes in town at the end of the day. Who could be in the closed wing? The wind swayed the curtains of a nearby window, and for an instant Evelyn swore she saw the figure of a man moving behind one of the windows on the upper floor of the restricted wing. That night, during dinner, served in the immense dining room of the mansion, Evelyn decided to confront Dominic. They ate in silence, with only the sound of cutlery against porcelain and the crackling of candles illuminating the table. Dominic was more somber than usual, lost in thoughts that seemed to torture him. "Dominic," she began, resting her fork on her plate, "today I heard noises coming from the closed wing of the house." He stopped chewing, his dark eyes fixing on her with an intensity that made her regret bringing up the subject. "It must have been some animal that got in through a broken window," he said, his voice too controlled to be natural. "They weren't animal noises," insisted Evelyn. "They were footsteps, a person's." The silence that followed was as tense as a violin string about to break. Dominic slowly rose from his chair, rounded the table, and stopped beside her. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "There are parts of this house where you should not go, Evelyn. Places that hold stories better left unknown." He touched her shoulder with one hand, and even through the fabric of her dress, she felt the heat burning her skin. "Promise me you won't return to that wing." Evelyn turned in her chair to face him, and the proximity between them was breathtaking. She could see the small scars on his face, smell the scent of his skin mixed with the woody notes of his cologne. "And if I don't promise?" she challenged, surprising herself with her own audacity. Dominic's eyes narrowed, and he leaned in further, placing his hands on the arms of her chair, trapping her. "Then I'll have to find other ways to ensure you stay away from dangers," he murmured, his face inches from hers. Evelyn's heart raced. She could feel his breath against her lips, see desire and conflict battling in his dark eyes. For a moment it seemed he would finally yield, that he would kiss her as she so desired. But then a noise echoed down the corridor, the unmistakable sound of a door closing forcefully. Dominic moved away as if he'd received a shock, running his hands through his hair in a demonstration of frustration. "You should go rest," he said, avoiding looking at her. "Tomorrow you have a lot of work ahead." But Evelyn didn't move. Instead, she stood up and approached him, touching his arm. "Dominic, what's happening here? Why do I have the feeling I've lived all this before? Why do you look at me as if I were a ghost?" He turned to her with an expression of such intense pain that Evelyn wanted to embrace him. "Because maybe you are," he said, his voice carrying an anguish that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "And if you are, then we are both lost." Before she could respond, Dominic left the room, leaving her alone with the candles that flickered and the shadows that danced on the walls, lined with portraits of the dead. Evelyn remained there for a long time, trying to process his words, the heat she still felt where he had touched her, and the growing certainty that she had fallen in love with a man who carried secrets too heavy to share. Later, already lying, in her room in the guest house, Evelyn was awakened by a strange sound, someone humming a soft melody, almost like a lullaby. The voice seemed to come from the direction of the mansion, floating through the night like a ghostly lament. She got up and went to the window, but all she saw were the faint lights of some windows and the imposing silhouette of the colonial building cut against the starry sky. But as she watched, one of the windows in the restricted wing briefly lit up, and Evelyn was sure she saw the shadow of a man moving inside before the light went out again, leaving only darkness and the echo of that mysterious song she seemed to have known forever. The dawn brought with it a restlessness that Evelyn couldn't name. She rose before sunrise, put on a robe, and walked to the porch of the guest house. The plantations stretched in orderly rows as far as the eye could see, covered by the morning mist rising from the valley. It was too beautiful to be real, as if she had awakened inside a dream. It was then that she noticed there were footprints in the damp earth of the garden, coming from the direction of the mansion and following to near her window. Large, masculine footprints, as if someone had come to observe her during the night. The thought made her shiver, but not from fear, from a strange excitement that surprised her. In the library that morning, Evelyn discovered something that would change everything. Hidden between the pages of a family genealogy book, she found a yellowed birth certificate. Evelyn Stewart, born March 15, 2001, daughter of Mary Alice Stewart and Ryan Sanchez. Ryan Sanchez. Dominic's missing brother was her father. Her hands trembled as she held the document. Everything was beginning to fit together in a terrifying way, the resemblance to Elizabeth, the familiarity with the house, the dreams that had visited her since childhood. She wasn't just a temporary employee, she was Sanchez blood. She was Dominic's niece. But if Ryan was her father, where was he? Why had her mother died in childbirth, like so many other women in the family? And why had Martha Grace, who she now realized was not her biological grandmother, kept the secret of her origin for so long? Dominic appeared in the library shortly after noon, and Evelyn faced him with a mixture of anger and confusion. When he saw what she had in her hands, his face paled as if he had seen a ghost. "You knew," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "From the first day you knew who I was." Dominic closed his eyes for a long moment, as if gathering courage to face that conversation. "I suspected," he admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "When I saw you for the first time, the resemblance was impossible to ignore. But I only became certain when I found your documents in the drawer of the desk where you work." "Ryan is my father," said Evelyn, standing from her chair. "Your missing brother is my father. And you brought me here. Knowing this—" "No," replied Dominic, approaching her with urgency. "You came on your own. I just didn't stop you." He stopped a few inches from her, and Evelyn could see the conflict in his eyes. "Ryan didn't disappear, Evelyn. He's alive." The world seemed to stop. "Where is he?" she whispered. Dominic hesitated before answering, and when he spoke, his voice was almost inaudible. "In the restricted wing. He never left here." The revelation hit Evelyn like a punch to the stomach. The voices she heard, the footsteps, the figure in the window. It was her father, alive, prisoner in his own house for more than 20 years. "Why?" she asked, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Because he broke the pact," said Dominic, running his hands through his hair in a demonstration of desperation. "Our family made a deal generations ago, prosperity and power in exchange for sacrifices. Ryan fell in love with your mother, tried to flee with her, break the cycle, but the pact cannot be broken with impunity." Evelyn felt a rage boiling in her chest. What kind of pact requires a man to be imprisoned by his own family? "The kind that kills all the women we love," replied Dominic, his voice carrying an ancestral pain. "My mother died. Ryan's mother died. Your mother died. Hannah died before we could even marry. All of them, Evelyn. All." She moved away from him, trying to process this impossible information. "And you believe this? In curses and supernatural pacts?" "I don't need to believe," he said, approaching again. "I live it every day. That's why I keep my distance from all women. That's why I fight against what I feel for you since the first moment I saw you." The air between them was charged with electricity. Evelyn could feel desire radiating from Dominic's body, the battle he fought with himself not to touch her, and she, despite all the anger and confusion, felt the same magnetic attraction pulling her in his direction. "And what do you feel for me?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Dominic closed his eyes as if the words caused physical pain. "Everything I shouldn't feel, everything that can destroy us." Evelyn took a step toward him, then another, until she was so close she could feel the heat of his body. "I want to see my father," she said, looking directly into his eyes. "No," Dominic immediately replied. "Ryan is no longer the man he was. 20 years of isolation, of guilt. He's not well." "He's my father," insisted Evelyn, touching Dominic's chest with the palm of her hand. She felt his heart race under her touch. "And I have the right to know him." Dominic covered her hand with his, interlacing their fingers. The gesture was so intimate that Evelyn felt a wave of heat run through her entire body. "If I take you to him," said Dominic, his voice hoarse, "if you see what he has become, there's no going back. You'll understand the extent of the curse that weighs on this family, and even then you won't be able to leave." "How do you know I won't be able to leave?" asked Evelyn, leaning slightly toward him. Dominic released her hand and touched her face with a reverence that made her shiver. "Because you are exactly like her, like Elizabeth, like all the others who loved men from this family. You can't resist what is dark in us, and we can't resist what is light in you." Before Evelyn could respond, Dominic leaned in and finally did what both had desired since their first meeting. He kissed her. It was a desperate kiss, full of hunger and despair, as if he were saying goodbye to something precious. Evelyn melted against him, her hands clutching his shoulders as she responded with the same intensity. When they separated, both were breathless. Dominic rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "Now it's too late," he murmured. "For both of us." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay thinking about the kiss, the revelation about her father, the curse that supposedly threatened her life. But above all, she thought of Dominic and the growing certainty that, curse or not, she was already hopelessly in love with him. The 3 days that followed the kiss were a torturous dance between approach and retreat. Dominic avoided being alone with Evelyn for too long, but she felt his eyes burning into her back whenever she worked in the library. When their hands brushed as he handed over documents, the electricity between them was so intense it seemed capable of igniting the ancient paper around them. Evelyn, for her part, was determined to meet her father. Every night, lying in her room, she looked toward the restricted wing and saw faint lights turning on and off, shadows moving behind closed curtains. She knew Ryan was there, so close and yet unreachable. The need to see him grew like an open wound in her chest. On Thursday, when Dominic left for a meeting in town, Evelyn made her decision. She went up to the restricted wing, removed the rope blocking the passage, and entered the forbidden corridor. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with a humidity that made the wallpaper peel from the walls. Furniture covered by sheets looked like slumbering ghosts, and her footsteps echoed on the wooden floor like funeral drums. She followed the sound of a male voice murmuring incomprehensible words behind one of the doors. When she opened it, she found a man sitting by the window, his back to her. Disheveled grey hair, hunched shoulders, wearing clothes that had once been elegant but now looked like faded costumes. "Dad?" whispered Evelyn. Ryan turned slowly, and she had to support herself against the doorframe. He had the same green eyes as her, but opaque like frosted glass. His face, which must have been handsome, was marked by premature wrinkles and an unkempt beard. When he saw her, his eyes widened as if she were an apparition. "Mary," he murmured, rising with stumbling movements. "Mary, you've come back to me?" Evelyn's heart broke. "No, I'm Evelyn, your daughter." Ryan blinked several times, confusion taking over his features. "Daughter, but Mary, and Mary died." "She died because I loved her." His hands trembled as he approached. "You can't be here. He can't let you stay. The women we love always die." "Dad, I came to take you away from here," said Evelyn, trying to control the emotion in her voice. "You don't need to remain a prisoner forever." "Prisoner?" Ryan laughed, but it was a broken sound, devoid of joy. "I'm not a prisoner, child. I'm a guardian of a secret that can destroy everything." He came closer, and Evelyn could see madness dancing in his eyes. "You shouldn't have been born. I broke the pact, and your mother paid the price. Now you're here, and history will repeat itself." It was at that moment that Dominic burst into the room, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and panic. "Evelyn, get out of here, now!" "Dominic," said Ryan, and for the first time his eyes gained a glimmer of lucidity. "You brought her here, brought my daughter near the curse." "I didn't bring anyone," retorted Dominic, but his voice carried guilt. "She came on her own." "Lies," Ryan laughed again, that terrible sound. "You were always weak for beautiful women, as I was, as our father was. It's the Sanchez blood. We're condemned to love what destroys us." Evelyn looked between the two men, trying to understand the complex dynamic that existed between them. "Will someone properly explain to me what this pact is? What exactly happens to the women in this family?" Dominic approached her, taking her by the arm. "Not here. Ryan isn't well enough to have this conversation." "I'm not well," Ryan guffawed. "I'm more lucid than you, brother. At least I accept what we are. You still believe you can fight against destiny." "What destiny?" asked Evelyn, freeing herself from Dominic's grip. "Talk to me, Dad. Tell me the truth." Ryan looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice gained a solemn, almost ritualistic tone. "Our family made a pact 2 centuries ago, Evelyn. Power and prosperity in exchange for a price. Each generation, the women who carry the fruit of a Sanchez's true love must die before the child completes 1 year. It's the price of our success." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "And the children?" "They survive," said Ryan, "but grow up orphaned, as you grew up, as I grew up, as Dominic grew up." "This is madness," said Evelyn, but her voice sounded weak even to herself. "It's the truth," said Dominic, his voice laden with pain. "That's why I keep my distance. That's why Ryan tried to flee with your mother. That's why he lives here isolated, because he refuses to accept that it cannot be broken." "It can be," said Ryan, his eyes shining with a disturbing intensity. "I discovered how, but the price—" He looked at Evelyn with a mixture of love and horror. "The price is greater than any of us imagined." Evelyn felt the world spin around her. The curse, the dreams, the irresistible attraction to Dominic. Everything was part of a larger plan, an ancestral trap of which she was both victim and central piece. And now, knowing the truth, the question echoing in her mind was terrifying. Was it already too late to escape? That night, when she finally managed to be alone with Dominic in the library, Evelyn faced him with a determination that surprised him. I want to break this curse, she said. Dominic looked at her as if she had lost her mind. Evelyn, you don't understand. It's not possible. You said Ryan discovered a way, she insisted, approaching. What is the price he mentioned? Dominic hesitated, and when he spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. The blood of the one who made the original pact must be willingly shed out of love. A Sanchez must die for the curse to be broken. The silence that followed was as dense as the mist that covered the plantations. Evelyn moved closer to Dominic, touching his face with both hands. Then we'll find another way, she said before kissing him again, this time with an intensity that spoke of desperation and hope in equal measure. When they separated, both knew they had crossed a line from which there was no return. The curse might be waiting for them, but at that moment in each other's arms they felt invincible. The following days brought a new intimacy between Evelyn and Dominic, as if knowing the truth about the curse had removed the last barriers between them. They worked side by side in the library, and now he didn't move away when their hands touched. On the contrary, their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they had always belonged that way. But the house seemed to react to the growing proximity between them. Lights flickered without explanation, doors opened by themselves during the night, and the wind moaned through the corridors even when the weather was calm outside. It was as if the very structure of the estate was trying to alert them about something imminent. One night, when Dominic accompanied Evelyn to the guest house after dinner, he stopped on the porch and pulled her into his arms without warning. The kiss that followed was different from the previous ones, deeper, more urgent, charged with a need that went beyond physical desire. It was as if they were trying to merge into one another, to escape the destiny that awaited them through the proximity of their bodies. Evelyn, murmured Dominic against her lips, his voice hoarse with desire. You don't know what you're doing to me. Yes, I do, she responded, her hands clutching his shirt. I'm making you feel alive for the first time in years. He looked into her eyes, and she saw vulnerability where before there had been only control. I'm afraid, he admitted. Afraid that by surrendering to you I'm signing your death sentence. Evelyn touched his face with tenderness. And I'm afraid that by moving away from you, I'm wasting the only true love of my life. She leaned in to whisper in his ear, The curse can only affect us if I become pregnant. Until then, we're free to love each other. Dominic closed his eyes, fighting against the desire that threatened to consume him. You don't understand. The curse doesn't wait for pregnancy. It begins to act the moment we completely surrender to each other. Hannah died before we even married, remember? So what do you propose? Asked Evelyn, moving slightly away. That we live as strangers? That we deny what we feel? I propose that we find a way to break this curse before we go any further, said Dominic. But even as he spoke, his hands moved around her waist, contradicting his words. It was at that moment they heard screams coming from the direction of the mansion. Desperate, agonizing screams that made both their blood run cold. It was Ryan. They ran toward the restricted wing and found Ryan in the middle of his room, kneeling on the floor, hands covering his face as he screamed like a wounded animal. When he saw them, his eyes were completely white, as if he were possessed. She is coming, he screamed. The Lady of the Curse is coming to claim what is hers. Dominic knelt beside his brother, trying to calm him. Ryan, look at me. It's just an episode. It will pass. But Ryan grabbed Dominic's arm with enough force to leave marks. It's not an episode, you idiot. It's a warning. You've awakened something that should have remained sleeping. His eyes turned to Evelyn, and when he spoke, his voice no longer seemed his own. Her blood is the key. It always was. That's why she came here, not by chance, by summons. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. What summons? The summons of origin, said Ryan, and now his voice had a prophetic tone that terrified her. The first Sanchez woman didn't die by curse, Evelyn. She sacrificed herself to create the curse, and her blood runs in your veins. Dominic stood up abruptly. What are you talking about? The truth our father never told us, said Ryan, his eyes regaining some lucidity. The pact wasn't made with supernatural entities. It was made with Hope Montgomery, our great-great-grandfather's first wife. She killed herself to curse our lineage after he betrayed her with another woman. Evelyn felt the world spin. Montgomery. My real name isn't Stewart, it's Montgomery. Exactly, said Ryan, smiling in a disturbing way. You are the last descendant of the woman who cursed us. And now you're in love with a Sanchez exactly as she predicted. The silence that followed was broken by a deafening noise from downstairs, the sound of all the windows in the house opening simultaneously, followed by an icy wind that rose up the stairs like a living entity. Dominic took Evelyn's hand. We need to get out of here now. But when they tried to leave the room, the door closed forcefully, locking them inside. The lights flickered and went out, leaving them in complete darkness. And then, a female voice echoed through the corridors of the house, clear as crystal and cold as ice. No Sanchez will leave this house until the debt is paid. Ryan began to laugh hysterically. Too late, he said. Hope has awakened, and she wants revenge. Evelyn clung to Dominic's arm, feeling waves of supernatural power pulsing through the walls around them. The entire house seemed alive now, breathing, watching, waiting. And she had the terrible certainty that her arrival there had not been coincidence. It had been orchestrated by forces she didn't understand, for a purpose she was beginning to fear discovering. Dominic, she whispered in the darkness. What does she mean by the debt? Before he could answer, they heard footsteps descending the stairs, steps that belonged to none of the three trapped in the room. Steps of someone who had been dead for more than 2 centuries, but who now walked the corridors of Westwood Estate as if she had never left. The curse wasn't just an abstract force. It was a woman who had patiently waited for generations for the perfect descendant to come to her. And now Evelyn was exactly where Hope had always planned for her to be. The walls of the room began to bleed. Outside the window, the plantations swayed as if an invisible storm was lashing them, and the sky, which moments before had been starry, darkened like pitch. Westwood Estate was no longer a refuge. It was a trap. And they had fallen directly into it. Dominic pulled Evelyn into his arms, but for the first time since they'd met, she felt that not even their love would be enough to save them from what was coming. The blood that ran down the walls formed words in archaic English, phrases that Evelyn could understand as if they had been engraved in her soul. The love that unites must be the love that destroys. The descendant has returned to pay the price that was denied. Dominic tried to force the door, but it remained immovable, as if it were part of the wall itself. Ryan had stopped laughing, and now observed the bloody words with an expression of unhealthy fascination. She's talking to you, Evelyn, he said, his voice gaining a disturbing lucidity. Hope wants you to understand why all this happened. I don't want to understand anything, replied Evelyn, but even as she spoke, she felt a strange compulsion to touch the red letters on the wall, as if her fingers were magnetized by the ancestral blood. It was then that the temperature in the room plummeted. Their breaths became visible in the cold air, and a translucent form began to materialize in the center of the room. It was a woman of ethereal beauty, dressed in a wedding gown stained with blood, black hair floating as if she were submerged in water. Hope Montgomery had returned. Her eyes were the same green color as Evelyn's, but carried centuries of anger and pain. When she spoke, her voice echoed as if coming from very far away. My descendant, finally the moment has arrived. Evelyn felt Dominic position himself protectively in front of her, but Hope merely smiled. A smile that froze the blood of everyone in the room. You think you can protect her from me, Sanchez? I am the reason your family prospers. Every coffee harvested, every dollar earned, every success achieved, all was paid for with woman's blood. Her eyes fixed on Evelyn. And now, the final piece is in place. What do you want? Asked Evelyn, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. Justice, replied Hope. Your great-great-grandfather promised me eternal love, gave me a son, and then abandoned me for a younger, richer woman. When I tried to stop him, he locked me in this house and left me to die of heartbreak. Her form floated closer. But before I died, I made a pact with forces older than this land. My pain would become their curse. Every Sanchez born would be condemned to lose what they loved most. "But why must the women die?" asked Evelyn. "We are not to blame for what your husband did." "Because," said Hope, her voice carrying all the bitterness of 2 centuries, "I wanted them to feel the same pain I felt, the pain of losing love forever." Ryan stood up, staggering. "And now, Evelyn is here. What changes?" Hope looked at him with something like pity. "Poor Ryan. You tried to break the curse by fleeing with my descendant, but you didn't understand. That was exactly what I wanted. I needed her to be born, to grow up, to come here of her own free will." The horror of comprehension hit Evelyn like lightning. "You orchestrated everything. My coming here, my meeting Dominic. Everything was planned." "Not everything," said Hope, her eyes softening slightly. "The love between you is real, and that's exactly why it will be so powerful." She turned to Dominic. "Do you truly love her?" Dominic didn't hesitate. "More than my own life." "And you?" she asked Evelyn. "Yes," answered Evelyn, her voice firm, despite the fear. "I love him." Hope smiled, and for a moment her expression almost seemed maternal. "Then you have something I never had, reciprocated and true love." She floated closer to Evelyn. "And that's exactly what I need to break my own curse." The revelation left everyone in silence. "Your curse?" asked Dominic. "Do you think it was easy for me to be trapped in this earthly plane for 2 centuries, watching generations of innocent women die because of my thirst for revenge?" Spectral tears began to stream down Hope's face. "I became a prisoner of my own anger, and I can only be freed when true love conquers the hatred that created me." Evelyn extended her hand, touching the ethereal form of her ancestor. At the Amjama moment of contact, a wave of memories not her own flooded her mind. Hope's pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, but also the profound love she had felt and that had been destroyed. "How can we help you?" asked Evelyn, tears streaming down her face. "The ritual is simple," said Hope. "You must unite in matrimony here in this house where everything began. Your true love will purify the curse, transforming my pain into blessing." She hesitated before continuing. "But there is a price. The union must be consummated, and you must accept the risk of the curse. If your love is strong enough to break the cycle, both will live. If not, we'll die," completed Dominic. "Yes," said Hope, "but you'll die together, and your souls will remain united forever." The room fell silent, except for the sound of their heavy breathing. The proposal was both terrible and seductive, to wager their lives on the power of their love. Evelyn looked at Dominic, seeing her own feelings reflected in his eyes. Fear, yes, but also an iron determination. They had come too far to turn back now. "If we do this," said Dominic, "and survive, will the curse be broken forever?" "Forever," confirmed Hope. "But if you fail, I will remain trapped here, and the curse will continue until another couple has the courage to try." Ryan, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. "And if they don't try, if they simply leave?" Hope looked at him with infinite sadness. "Then Evelyn will die anyway, because she is already carrying the fruit of their love." The world seemed to stop. Evelyn instinctively placed her hand on her belly and knew without a shadow of doubt that Hope was right. The symptoms she had ignored in recent weeks, the morning nausea, the sensitivity, the fatigue, everything made sense now. Dominic looked at her with a mixture of joy and absolute terror. "You're pregnant." It was a statement, not a question. And at that moment, both knew there was no longer a choice. The ritual was their only chance to survive, together or not. The silence that followed the revelation of the pregnancy was broken by Dominic, who knelt before Evelyn and took her hands in his. His eyes were shining with unshed tears, but also with a determination she had never seen before. "Evelyn," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I can't promise we'll survive this, but I can promise I'll love you until my last breath, whether it comes today or 100 years from now." She touched his face tenderly, feeling the warmth of his skin contrasting with the supernatural cold that still dominated the room. "Then, let's do it," she said. "Let's bet our lives on our love." Hope observed the scene with an expression that mixed hope and melancholy. "The ritual must be performed before dawn," she said, "when the veils between worlds are thinnest." She gestured, and the doors of the room opened with a creak. "Prepare yourselves, I will wait for you in the estate's chapel." "Chapel?" asked Evelyn. "I didn't know there was a chapel here." Ryan stood up, seeming more lucid than he had been in weeks. "There are many things on this estate you haven't yet discovered," he said. "The chapel is in the oldest part of the property, where the first Sanchez built his house. It's there that Hope died. It's there you must marry." The hours that followed passed like a dream. Evelyn bathed and dressed in a simple white dress she found in an old wardrobe. It had belonged to Elizabeth, her ancestor, and it fit her as if it had been made to measure. Dominic wore a dark suit that enhanced his masculine beauty and commanding presence. Ryan accompanied them across the property, carrying candles and murmuring prayers in Latin he had learned during his years of isolation. The chapel was in a clearing surrounded by century-old trees, a small and simple stone construction, covered with ivy and moss. There was something sacred about that place, as if the earth itself held memories of love and pain. Inside the chapel, Hope awaited them. Her spectral form had become more solid, more real, as if the proximity of the ritual gave her substance. She had created an improvised altar with wildflowers and candles, and on it rested an ancient Bible, bound in leather with yellowed pages. "The marriage must be real in every sense," explained Hope, as they positioned themselves before the altar. "True vows, true commitment, true love. Only this way will the ritual have power to break the curse." Dominic took Evelyn's hands, intertwining their fingers. There was no priest, no family, only the two of them and the unlikely witnesses of Ryan and the spirit of a woman dead for 2 centuries. But when Dominic began to speak, his words carried a power that transcended any formal ceremony. "Evelyn," he said, looking directly into her eyes, "from the moment you entered my life, everything changed. You brought light to places in my soul I thought were dead forever. I promise to love you through any storm, to protect you with my life and to honor you as the extraordinary woman you are. If we die today, let it be knowing our love was real. If we survive, let it be to build a life together, free from the chains of the past." Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face, but her voice came out firm and clear. "Dominic, you taught me that true love is worth any risk. I promise to stand by your side through any darkness, to trust you with my heart and my life, and to love you with every fiber of my being." How a child will grow up knowing it was conceived in the purest love that ever existed. Hope approached, carrying 2 simple gold rings that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. "With these rings, seal your union," she said, her voice echoing supernaturally. "May the love you feel for each other be stronger than death, more powerful than the curse, more eternal than time." They exchanged rings with trembling hands, and the moment the last ring was placed, the entire chapel illuminated, with a golden light that didn't come from the candles. The air charged with energy, making Evelyn's hair float as if she were submerged in water. "Now," said Hope, "you must consummate the union. It is in the total surrender to each other that the ritual is completed." Ryan discreetly left the chapel, leaving them alone with Hope, who withdrew to the shadows like a silent sentinel. Dominic looked at Evelyn, and she saw in his eyes the same mixture of desire and reverence that she felt in her own heart. He led her to the altar, where a blanket had been spread over the stone floor. The golden light continued to pulse around them, creating an atmosphere that was both mystical and intensely intimate. "Are you sure?" asked Dominic, his voice husky with emotion. In response, Evelyn pulled him closer and kissed him with a passion that burned like sacred fire. It was a kiss that spoke of total surrender, of love that transcended the fear of death, of 2 souls recognizing each other across centuries of separation. When they lay together on the blanket, their hands exploring and memorizing every inch of each other's body, the world around them seemed to disappear. There was only the 2 of them, their love and the hope that it would be enough to break a curse of 2 centuries. The union was both tense and gentle, charged with an intensity that went far beyond the physical. It was as if their souls were merging, creating something new and powerful that not even death could destroy. Evelyn surrendered completely, feeling each of Dominic's touches as a promise, each kiss as a blessing. At the moment of climax, when they truly became one, an explosion of white light filled the chapel. The sound of chains breaking echoed through the air, followed by a warm wind that carried the aroma of jasmine and coffee. The curse was being tested, forced to bend before the power of their love. But as they embraced, breathless and bathed in sweat, both knew that the real test was yet to come. The golden light began to flicker, and in the shadows of the chapel dark forms began to materialize, the ghosts of all the women who had died by the curse, coming to claim their part in the ritual. The final battle was just beginning. The shadows, materializing in the chapel, gained human form. Women from different eras, all wearing clothes from their respective generations, all bearing the mark of premature death on their ethereal faces. Elizabeth was among them, as were dozens of others whom Evelyn had seen only in portraits. They formed a circle around the couple, their eyes shining with a spectral light. "You think your love is different?" asked one of them, a young woman, who couldn't have been more than 20 when she died. "We all loved too. We all believed our love would be strong enough." Dominic positioned himself protectively in front of Evelyn, but she touched his arm, signaling that she didn't need protection. Instead, she addressed the ghostly women directly. "You're right," said Evelyn, her voice echoing in the silent chapel. "Our love is no different from yours. But our situation is, you died as victims of the curse. We have the chance to break it." "At what cost?" asked Elizabeth, approaching. "Our pain, our suffering, our eternal separation from our loved ones. Will all this be erased as if it never existed?" Hope materialized among the other women, and for the first time Evelyn saw uncertainty in her eyes. "I didn't know they would come," she murmured. "The ritual is bringing forth all the souls trapped by the curse." "They have the right to be here," said Evelyn, extending her hand to Elizabeth. "They are also part of this story." When Evelyn's fingers touched Elizabeth's, a wave of shared memories flooded the chapel. All the women present, living and dead, simultaneously experienced the love each had felt, the pain of separation, the terror of the approaching curse. But they also felt something new, the hope that shone in Evelyn's heart. "She is pregnant, as we were," said one of the women, one who wore clothes from the previous century. "But unlike us, she has a choice." "What choice?" asked Dominic, approaching the circle of ghosts. It was then that the deepest truth was revealed. Elizabeth spoke, her voice carrying a wisdom that transcended death. "The curse feeds on separation, on fear, on doubt. Each time a couple succumbed to terror instead of clinging to love, it grew stronger. You can break it, but only if you are willing to die together if necessary." "Die together?" asked Evelyn. "The curse will offer you a choice," explained Hope, approaching. "Save your own life in exchange for the others. That's how it separates couples, creating a dilemma where love becomes impossible. None of us could resist when the time came." Dominic understood immediately. "You're saying the curse will force us to choose between our lives?" "Yes," said Elizabeth, "and the only way to break it is to refuse the choice. Accept that if one dies, both die. Only love that prefers death to separation can destroy a curse created by separation." At that moment, the chapel began to tremble. The stone floor cracked, and a fissure opened in the center, revealing an abyss of darkness that seemed to extend to the center of the earth. From there emerged a voice that was not human, charged with malice and ancestral power. "The ritual is almost complete," echoed the voice of the curse personified. "But first you must make a choice." Two visions materialized before Evelyn and Dominic. In the first, she saw herself fleeing the estate, living a long and safe life far away, but forever alone, while Dominic remained prisoner of the curse until death. In the second, she saw Dominic escaping and herself dying in childbirth, like all the others before her. "Choose," said the voice. "Save yourselves or condemn the person you love. You cannot have both." The silence in the chapel was deafening. Evelyn felt the weight of the decision on her shoulders, and for a terrible moment, considered the possibility of saving her own life. It would be so easy to just run away. But then she looked at Dominic and saw in his eyes the same dilemma. He too was considering saving her at his own expense. And it was in this moment that she understood the true trap of the curse. It didn't want them to choose their own lives at the expense of the other. It wanted them to choose the other's life at the expense of their own, because that would still be separation. "No," said Evelyn, loud and clear. "We will not choose." Dominic looked at her with surprise, then understanding. "We live together or die together," he said, taking her hand. "Impossible!" roared the voice of the curse. "You must choose." "No," said Evelyn again, stronger this time. "Our love does not accept separation. If you want one of us, you will have to take both. And if you take both, you will have no power over our child, because it was born of true love, not fear." The visions began to dissolve, and the fissure in the floor began to close. The voice of the curse screamed in frustration, a sound that made the stones of the chapel tremble. The ghostly women began to glow with a soft light, and one by one, they began to fade away, finally free. "You've succeeded," said Elizabeth before disappearing completely. "You've proven that true love is stronger than any curse." Hope was the last to go. She approached Evelyn and Dominic, and for the first time in 2 centuries smiled with genuine happiness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for allowing me to rest, for proving that the love I sought really exists." She leaned in and kissed Evelyn's forehead. "Your daughter will be born blessed, not cursed, and you two will have a long and happy life together." With these words, hope dissolved into particles of golden light that danced through the chapel before completely disappearing. The fissure in the floor closed, the cracks in the walls healed, and the supernatural light gave way to the soft luminosity of dawn entering through the windows. Evelyn and Dominic embraced in the silence of victory, feeling the weight of generations of pain finally dissolve. The curse had been broken, not by force or magic, but by the simple and powerful truth that their love was indivisible. When they finally left the chapel, they found Ryan waiting outside, tears of relief streaming down his face. For the first time in 20 years, he was truly free from the guilt, the isolation, the madness that the curse had brought to his life. "It's over," he said, embracing both. "It's finally over." The sun rose over the plantations of Westwood Estate, tinting the sky gold and pink, promising a new day for a family finally free from the weight of the past. 9 months later, Westwood Estate had transformed into something no Sanchez had ever imagined possible, a true home filled with laughter, music, and the warm presence of a united family. The walls that once echoed ghostly whispers now resonated with animated conversations. The aroma of coffee mingled with the perfume of fresh flowers that Evelyn cultivated in the gardens, and the sunlight seemed more golden, more alive, as if the earth itself had been blessed. Evelyn was on the porch of the mansion, gently cradling her newborn daughter, a girl with dark hair and green eyes that shone with a serene light, without any trace of the curse that had haunted generations. Hannah, they had named her, in honor of Dominic's first lost love, slept peacefully in her mother's arms, oblivious to the miracle her existence represented. "How are my 2 most precious women?" asked Dominic, approaching from behind and enveloping Evelyn and the baby in his arms. He had changed in the last months. The tense features had softened, the worry lines around his eyes had given way to smile marks, and there was a lightness in his movements that spoke of a man finally at peace with himself. "Perfect," replied Evelyn, nestling against her husband's chest. Hannah just nursed, found his satisfied like a little empress. She turned slightly to look at him. "And you? How is the meeting with the buyers from New York?" "Better than I expected," said Dominic, kissing the top of her head. "This season's coffee is being considered the best the estate has ever produced. It's as if the land has awakened to a new life." He paused, contemplating the plantations that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Sometimes I still can't believe we did it. That breaking the curse was really possible." Evelyn smiled, remembering the transformative night in the chapel. "It wasn't easy to believe in the power of our love when everything around us said it was impossible. But you believed, said Dominic, touching her face tenderly. When I was ready to accept that we were doomed, you insisted there was hope. You taught me that true love knows no limits. From inside the house came the sound of footsteps and a familiar voice. Ryan appeared on the porch, carrying a tray with coffee and homemade cookies. In the last months he had completely transformed. His grey hair was well trimmed, his face had regained a healthy colour, and his eyes shone with a lucidity he hadn't shown in decades. "I thought you might like a snack," he said, setting the tray on the wicker table. "And I wanted to check on my newest niece." Ryan had become the most devoted uncle Hannah could have. After 20 years of isolation, he delighted in every moment spent with the family, as if recovering all the lost time. He had resumed his studies of history, helped with the estate administration, and was even considering the possibility of seeking female companionship, something that seemed impossible just a year before. "She's growing so fast," said Ryan, observing the baby with loving eyes. "And look at this hair. Will she have her mother's curls?" "I hope so," said Dominic, gently running a finger over Hannah's rosy cheek. "I want her to be exactly like her mother, strong, courageous, and capable of transforming the world around her just by her presence." Evelyn felt her eyes fill with tears of happiness. 6 months ago, when Hannah was born, everyone had held their breath, waiting to see if the curse had really been broken. But the baby came into the world with a healthy and vigorous cry, and since then had been a tranquil and radiant child, as if she carried within her all the light that had been missing from that family for generations. "Have you decided when you'll make the trip to Somerset?" asked Ryan, helping himself to coffee. It was another project Dominic and Evelyn had planned, a visit to the town where she grew up, to introduce Hannah to Martha Grace, and personally tell the woman who had raised her how they could thank her for having protected Evelyn until the right moment. The old healer had known more than she revealed, and they wanted to honor her wisdom. "Next week," answered Evelyn. "Martha is eager to meet her foster granddaughter, and I want Hannah to know her roots." She looked at her husband with love. "All of them. And after that, will you start thinking about giving Hannah a little brother?" asked Ryan with a mischievous smile. Dominic and Evelyn looked at each other and laughed. "Maybe," said Dominic, "now that we know our children will be born free from the curse, the idea of a large family is very tempting." That night, after Ryan had retired and Hannah was placed in her crib, Evelyn and Dominic walked to the chapel where they had married. The small building had become a place of personal pilgrimage for them, a physical reminder of how love had triumphed over darkness. "Sometimes I come here just to make sure it all really happened," said Evelyn, nestling in her husband's arms. "That it wasn't a dream too wonderful to be real." "I understand," said Dominic, kissing her hair. "There are moments when I look at you, at Hannah, at the peace we've found, and I feel as if I don't deserve so much happiness." "We do deserve it," said Evelyn firmly, turning to face him. "After everything we went through, all the risks we took, we deserve every moment of happiness we've won." They remained embraced in silence, contemplating the stars that shone over the plantations. The night breeze carried the perfume of jasmine they had planted around the chapel, mixed with the sweet, rich aroma of coffee that would be harvested in a few months. "You know what impresses me most?" said Dominic after a long moment. "What?" "The fact that our story began with fear. Fear of the curse, fear of loving each other, fear of the future. And it ended with the absolute certainty that there is nothing we can face that is stronger than our love." Evelyn smiled, remembering the first day she stepped onto Westwood Estate, nervous and not knowing she was walking toward her destiny. "Our story hasn't ended," she said, touching his chest over his heart. "It's just beginning. Hannah will grow up here, perhaps have siblings, and one day we'll tell her about how her parents' love broke a curse of 2 centuries. And about how her mother was the bravest woman who ever lived," added Dominic, kissing her with all the passion of the first days, but also with the security of someone who knew they would have a lifetime to love each other. When they finally returned home, walking hand in hand under the light of the full moon, Evelyn knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just the love of her life, but her true home, Westwood Estate, which had once been a place of sadness and curse, had transformed into the perfect setting for a love story that would last forever. And in the mountains of Virginia, where coffee grew strong and aromatic, where jasmine perfumed the nights, and where a family had finally found peace, the wind whispered stories of hope